can I first start off by thanking Dave Burrows and David Broadway for, in a sense, making this evening's reception possible. I'm really, really grateful. I've got a second thought. Thank you to David Burrows. I've never asked permission, but I've been using your, well, I call it the New World video, David. Do you call it New World, or the one that starts off with the kid? It's beautiful. I've been using it all over the world. I've never asked permission, but I assume it's okay. Interestingly, very interestingly, he won't thank me for telling you this, but I was having a chat on the way out this afternoon from House Lords with Melvin Bragg, and Stuart Sutherland and I were talking about this. And Melvin is absolutely very casually said to me, what do you think? YouTube. I said, yeah. What? He said, is it any good? I said, yeah, it's great. He said, well, what would I find on it? I said, everything. He said, what do you mean everything? I said, what, some of my stuff? I said, probably all your stuff. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic that this incredibly sophisticated friend of mine has never been on YouTube and is going to get the shock of his life tonight. It's, I don't know if it's going to be Steam or Eureka. But anyway, so you're going to see a whole lot of programs on Sky that are YouTube-based coming from Melvin in the next year or two. It is a pleasure to get the chance to talk to you. I mean, one of the things I wanted to say was the title. It's a great title, Larry. Mind the Gap. Why is it Mind the Gap? Because there is a gap. If there wasn't a gap, we wouldn't have to be here and we wouldn't have to worry about this. But there is still a gap. In my old industry, we used to talk about people who, ridiculous shorthand really, who people either got it or didn't get it. And it was almost impossible to explain to people who didn't get it what it was. So you'd have really ridiculous conversation about it, but you didn't know what it was. It was pretty redundant conversation. And I think that that's in a sense where we still are. Fortunately, 85% probably the population now sort of do get it, but we've still got a number that don't, and until that number's been closed to zero, we will have a problem. I'm the poor man's Martha Lane Fox, and says, I'm the digital champion for Ireland, which is where I live, trying to ape in some pathetic way what the extraordinary job that Martha's done here in the UK. And I see it very much in Ireland. Ireland's an interesting country because it's much more, it's very rural, much more spread out, a lot of people unconnected. And my job really is getting to the non-liners and trying to convince people that actually can change their life. I've got three, it's worth mentioning, I've got three sort of tasks. The easy one, ironically, is education. I happen to have a very good education minister I work with, Rory Quinn, makes life, for me, makes life very comfortable. The second one is SMEs, another completely different problem altogether. And the last one is the elderly. And the elderly, in a sense, is the most challenging, the most interesting, and it's the non-liners. And that's where we're putting, in Ireland, putting a lot of effort and energy. But in a sense, this isn't so much about them, it's the other end of the spectrum. This is about schools. 20 years ago, it was 20 years ago, I and Stephen Heppel and Ken Robinson had a conversation, it was over 20 years, so it's 22 years ago, about the fact that we really believed that technology and education, were they able to meet, could be transformatory. There were one or two people who agreed at the time, but we were actually, particularly Stephen, was regarded as a nutter. Stephen still is a nutter, but Ken and I have become legitimate figures since then. But there was an issue, and that issue needed to be addressed. I think, David, I'm looking at you when I say this, I think if anyone had told us over 20 years ago that we would have actually had such relatively limited or slow development, I'm not sure, I think we would have been demoralised, and I'm not sure we'd have believed them. So it's taken a hell of a long time to even reach the point we have, but we're getting there. To illustrate where we've got to, here's a statistic. I was desperately trying to phone my colleagues to double check this because it's an unaudited figure, but it's a very exciting figure. I chair the TES advisory board, Times Educational Supplement Board, which is a terrific gig and I enjoy it a lot. We have, this is just one social media site for teachers, the TES Connect. There are others, but this is one. We believe, and we're waiting to audit it, we believe that this, in the first week of term this year, per day, 1 million teacher downloads per day. This didn't exist in 2008 at all. It is an extraordinary statistic. I mean, a really, really extraordinary statistic. It's also doubly extraordinary because at one point it did appear that it was teachers that were being reluctant. It was teachers who, in a sense, were beginning to look like the problem instead of the answer. And the dramatic change in the last 5, 6, 7 years. But that is, I think, is amazing. 1 million downloads a day. Also worth mentioning that the uploads by teachers has now also hit the same figure. It's just a tad under 1 million, of which 71% are user-generated. So 71% of them come from teachers themselves. This is not companies putting stuff online. This is teachers putting their own ideas online. And the idea, and Sir Tim and I were just talking about this, the idea of this as a constantly circulating, being reiterated and improved, is probably the dream that he had 25 years ago, of this thing that could generate excitement and advance knowledge, and actually, I think, change our children's lives. I mentioned one video of David's that I use. There's another one, and this is really extraordinary. People like me, and I'm sure others of you who do a lot of presentations, you do at some point begin to suffer from your own presentation fatigue. You've looked at this damn slide or this clip so long that you can't believe there's anyone in the world that either hasn't seen it or isn't going to get bored witless looking at it. And we also discovered that it's not quite true. There are always new audiences, or one thing or another. The clip I've used a lot in the last year, it is a year now, is something I borrowed, and with permission, from Steven Spielberg. He made a movie, some of you will have seen it, of War Horse. There's a scene in War Horse, you'll remember, which is the cavalry charge. And the cavalry, as you remember, get absolutely obliterated by as soon as the machine gun starts to mow them down. And I've argued that this is what happens, that there is a moment where technology changes everything. Now, interestingly, over Christmas, I've been reading a really wonderful book, and I'm sure he'd be very happy for me to recommend it to you, Max Hastings' book, Catastrophe, which is about the first year of the First World War. And the book is riveting read. But one of the things the book makes clear, and I've tried to say this, but I haven't had the kind of evidence that he's given me, is that in August, beginning of August 1914, the cavalry wanted their horses. They actively didn't want machine guns. They thought that war and horses and glory and courage were all synonymous, and that that's the way it was. And in one battle, I think on the 22nd of August, 3 weeks later, they discovered how utterly wrong they'd been. I think the figure I got, 34,000 people died that day. Most casualties of any day ever. Now, I'm not trying to over-dramatize the situation. I'm really trying to say is, when I show that clip to teachers, head teachers, educationalists, when we talk about get it and don't get it, they get it. They suddenly realize actually something so dramatic can happen that all the previous ideas and beliefs and almost religious beliefs in the way that teaching and learning occurred have been obviated. And that's the point we've reached, but tragically not quite for everyone. The last clip I use, try to get a laugh a certain time, is a clip from Ferris Bueller. I don't know how many of you remember Ferris Bueller. There's a wonderful, wonderful scene where the teacher says, anybody, anybody, and I show it to teachers, and this wonderful moment of recognition. They've all been there. Some of them have even done it, and they all know they can never do it again. And so we're dealing with this extraordinary transformation that's occurring, both in terms of volume of uptake, as identified, I think, by the TES experience, power of example, which certainly the War Horse does to me, and I always show it in conjunction with your film, showing what this other world is and why we owe it to our kids to introduce them to that world, because if we don't, we're effectively disabling them at school. So all these things are occurring at the same time. And all these things, the things like Valerie and that Mind the Gap are addressing. And we can't get there fast enough. The last thing I want to say is the following. 7 happiest years of my life, and most fulfilling job I ever got, was as president of UNICEF. And as you went around the world with that job, you saw it wasn't just a gap, it was a gulf. So at the moment we're, I suppose, in a sense, talking about the UK here, you take that gap and you start looking at it overseas, and it becomes massive. And you do begin to realize that we are leaving not just thousands, millions of young people behind. And that's, I think, an area where we can address and will address the future. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to host this. It's a pleasure to do anything I can to support Valerie as the most energetic human being I know. Frankly, I know you've got other people to listen to, so I'll shut up. But thanks very much for listening to me.